Good morning and welcome to the Foggy Dew. This is Colin. Well, gang, I wanted to go ahead and respond to a bunch of text messages I had gotten the other day. And just so everybody knows, the producer of the Foggy Dew is safe. Mr. Producer was able to get on the first cruise ship out of Puerto Vallarta. Now, he had texted me regarding his harrowing experience. And what he relayed to me is that as he was boarding the cruise ship, bombs were going off, bullets were snapping by his ears, but he was able to crawl up the gangplank and actually get on the cruise ship, and they were able to sail out of Puerto Vallarta. Now, I don't know where he was going on the seven seas after that, but I would imagine going somewhere a little bit safer would be a good idea. Someplace like Iran, North Korea, those would maybe be a little bit safer than Puerto Vallarta right now. So I've got no idea where the cruise ship is going to take him next. But anyway, he survived his harrowing experience. He's living to see another day. But most importantly, he's going to be producing Foggy Dew shows, which I think is really all anybody cares about. So I know we had a lot of people that were on pin. Well, maybe not a lot of people, maybe one or two, but there were people on pins and needles about it. But again, Mr. Producer is safe. He's got a story to tell that he'll have to tell somewhere else, not on the Foggy Dew, but I'm sure he's got a story about it. So I'll go ahead and dive into the meat of the show then. I have an interesting St. Louis story about World War II that I've been sitting on. And I guess the best place to start this story is outside of Germany in 1945. Now, you got to remember, ever since the United States and the Allied forces, Canada, England, ever since they landed at Normandy Beach, the goal was always Germany. The push was always to Germany. Capturing Germany, capturing Berlin, capturing Hitler, that was always the goal ever since they set foot on Normandy. Well, obviously, as the United States advanced, the Germans retreated. Now, the Germans had eventually been forced to fall back to a final defensive position outside of Germany. That final defensive position was called the Siegfried Line. Think of it like the Maginot Line outside of France in World War I. So here you have the Allies, including the US, advancing on the Siegfried Line, the final defensive barrier outside of Germany. Well, what happened is that the German forces were so depleted at this point that the Allies quickly overwhelmed the Siegfried Line. Well, what did that do when the Siegfried Line fell? Well, that forces the Nazis, the German army, to fall back into Germany proper. Now, you got to realize the Germans are in total retreat. They knew at this point the war was over. But Germany also knew that they were going to try to do everything they could to stall the advance. Well, how do you stall the advance of the Allies? Blow bridges. Remember, Germany has a natural barrier. That would be the Rhine River. So obviously, if the Nazis destroy those bridges, you're going to slow the Allied advance. You can't roll tanks across it. You can't roll hundreds of thousands of soldiers across a river right away. You have to either get boats, you have to build a bridge, etc. That slows the advance and allows the Germans time to regroup. So obviously, when the Germans lost the Siegfried Line, they started blowing every bridge. They blew every bridge except one. The bridge that they were unable to blow was called the Ludendorff Bridge. Now, the interesting thing about the Ludendorff Bridge is that the Germans had actually wired that bridge to blow. They put a couple tons of, this is a massive bridge. They put a couple tons of dynamite on it. Now, the interesting thing about the Ludendorff Bridge is that when the Germans tried to blow that bridge up, only part of the explosives went off, so the bridge was still intact. Now, you got to imagine the Allies are coming up at these guys. So the Germans see this, the Allies are that close, the Germans retreat, they can't blow the bridge. Well, here are the Allies, they're shocked. They're shocked when they see the Ludendorff Bridge still intact. Well, that bridge then immediately becomes very, very critical to the Allied powers, to the United States. That is the only existing bridge into the German interior at this point. Well, obviously, what are you going to do in a war, in a battle situation? Immediately when they saw that the bridge was intact, the Allies crossed the bridge to set up a perimeter inside of Germany. So they crossed the bridge right away. They set up a defensive perimeter so they can hold this bridge. It's that critical. Now, you got to realize too that at that point, the Allies cannot retreat. Once you're across into the German interior, the Germans are going to throw everything but the kitchen sink at you because they want that bridge destroyed. Well, of course, what happens then? This leads to a major battle. That battle was called the Battle of Remagen. Now, Remagen is actually the city that is right there across from the Ludendorff Bridge. Now, the interesting thing about the Battle of Remagen is that that battle saw all new tactics on both sides. Remember, the Germans need this thing destroyed. So they are desperately attacking this bridge. What did they employ? The Germans employed infantry, armored division, meaning tanks. They started shooting howitzers at it, mortars. They had a brand new super mortar that they were trying at that they shot at the bridge. Again, kitchen sink. They had new aircraft bombers that they were sending at it. Those were Arado turbojets. These are bombers. So they're throwing everything they can at this bridge. The interesting thing about this too, from the German perspective, the Germans actually fired their new rockets. And you might have heard of these rockets before. They were called V2 rockets. The V2 rocket was basically a ballistic missile. So this is the first time ever in combat that a ballistic missile was fired, but it's called a V2 rocket. So again, this is how critical the Ludendorff Bridge is to the Germans to destroy it. Now, you got to realize, how did the Americans respond to that? Well, the US forces, the Allied forces, put an enormous anti-aircraft battery there to stop bombers, fighter jets from attacking the bridge. That anti-aircraft battery by the Americans, that was the largest ever in the war. US forces were attacked by 367 Luftwaffe fighters. Those are German fighter planes. The thing that's interesting about this battle is that that was the largest anti-aircraft battle in US history. That's how much firepower was going out on the anti-aircraft side for the United States. Now, I talked about the V2 rockets, these new super mortars by the Germans. Well, the US deployed all new technology as well. They employed top secret tech. The top secret tech that the US deployed was called canal defense lights. Those lights were used to detect frogmen. Now, the Germans had actually, again, this is how important this bridge was. The Germans actually sent frogmen in with bombs to try to detonate the piers to knock the bridge down. Well, with those new canal lights, the frogmen were identified, seen, and they were killed. Long story short, with this entire situation is that US forces were able to hold that bridge. They held the bridge long enough to erect a parallel bridge next to it, meaning an artificial bridge that wouldn't fall down. So the minute that they're able to erect this other bridge, this artificial bridge next to the Ludendorff Bridge, the US was very quickly able to move 125,000 soldiers, tanks, artillery, etc. across it. So now the US forces have a beachhead inside of the German interior. Now, the interesting thing about this entire battle is that estimates on what this battle meant, meaning this shortened the course of the war. Because if they had been stopped at the Rhine River, it would have taken much longer to get across the bridge. Killing would have kept going on. They think that the World War II was shortened by 3 to 4 weeks, all the way to 2 months because of this. The estimates were that capturing this bridge, fighting for it, saved the United States and Allied forces about 10,000 casualties. So lives were saved because of this. Now, how long did the holding the bridge take? Actually, holding this bridge took about 18 days. So it took US and Allied forces 18 days to hold this bridge. You might be curious on US casualties. The US had close to 1,000 casualties. They can't even estimate how many German casualties there were. Now, such an interesting story in and of itself about the bridge, the Battle of Remagen, but I said this was a St. Louis story. Well, why was it a St. Louis story? The Battle of Remagen started March 7th, 1945. The Battle of Remagen started March 7th when US soldiers crossed the Ludendorff Bridge. Now, you might be curious, included in the first Americans to cross the bridge on March 7th, included in that group would be Corporal Jack Buck. Corporal Jack Buck was one of the first men across that bridge, which means that Corporal Jack Buck was one of the first United States soldiers to step foot on German soil in World War II. And I hope everybody listening knows who Jack Buck is. Jack Buck is in 7 Halls of Fame for sports. His son is Joe Buck. Now, for anybody that lives in the Missouri area or St. Louis region, Jack Buck was and is royalty in St. Louis. He is a St. Louis Cardinal baseball icon. So he's one of the first men to cross the bridge on March 7th. Well, here it is, March 15th. So 8 days after the crossing of the bridge, Corporal Jack Buck was wounded in action. The squad that he was in, the squad that he was part of, came under direct German fire. So Jack Buck was hit in the leg and forearm by German shrapnel. So here's Jack Buck, the future announcer of the Cardinals and national sports announcer, has now been hit by German fire. Well, here's another interesting wrinkle for people in the Missouri and St. Louis area. Do you want to know who the medic was that treated him in the field? Who was the medic that treated Jack Buck in the field? That would be Frank Borgi. Now, you might ask yourself, who's Frank Borgi? And if that name doesn't ring a bell, I get it. Well, Frank Borgi was from St. Louis. Well, not only is he from St. Louis, he was also a very famous soccer player. Frank Borgi was the goalie on the U.S. team that beat England 1-0 in the 1950 World Cup. That 1-0 game against England from the U.S. in the World Cup is one of the greatest upsets ever in the history of sports, ever. There was a book and a movie written about that match, that 1-0 USA-England match in 1950. It was called The Game of Their Lives. Now, people in St. Louis that are involved in that story that know about it, there were 3 St. Louis-born players that were on that 1950 USA team. Frank Borgi, the goalie, Harry Kehoe, and Gino Pirani. But again, the crazy thing about this is, here is Corporal Jack Buck being treated by Frank Borgi. And you might be curious to know about Borgi's experience in World War II. Frank Borgi, again, the goalie for the 1950 U.S. men's soccer team, Borgi won a Bronze Star and a Purple Heart in World War II. Jack Buck won a Purple Heart at the Battle of Remagen. Now, after that happened, so Jack Buck gets injured in the leg and in the arm. Jack Buck's war was over at that point because obviously he was sent back to a military hospital. He's recuperating. Well, by that point, the war was over. So Jack Buck's war is over. The Allies win World War II. They capture Germany. They capture Berlin. After that, Jack Buck goes back to the United States. He ends up attending Ohio State. And after he attended Ohio State, the rest is history. But it's just such an interesting, forgotten part of history. And I guess thank you, Corporal Jack Buck, and thank you, Frank Borgi. But again, if you're a person that lives in the Missouri or St. Louis area, not only were these guys amazing sports guys and total legends, but they were also badass American heroes. And again, did you know that Jack Buck was one of the first U.S. soldiers to set foot on the German interior in World War II? Crazy, crazy story, and I really hope you enjoyed it. So, switching gears, I'm sure some people tuned in to hear my thoughts on the State of the Union speech. And quite frankly, I'm sure you've heard, if you're interested in politics at least, I'm sure you've heard exhaustive analysis on the State of the Union speech. And to be fair, I'm not going to sit here and analyze it. I could go into every part of it. I don't really want to. I just really want to make a few comments about some of my takeaways from it and what I think happens next. And I guess my main takeaway from any of these speeches, it's a moment in time. Nobody remembers State of the Union speeches. Nobody. Nobody remembers what comes out of it. Nothing. Now, personally, I will remember the Medal of Honor awards. And I guess how amazing are these people, these heroes that we have, these true blue American heroes that got their medals of honor at the speech. And one of them was Royce Williams. Royce Williams, that was the guy I talked about on the show, the Korean fighter pilot. This guy is a total badass. He's 100 years old. I thought that was one of the most amazing parts of the night, was seeing that man get up, this true blue American hero, and there's Melania Trump putting his Medal of Honor on. I just thought it was such a great visual, and watching that gentleman smile and be so proud of I just thought it was a great moment. That's one of the big takeaways for me. But again, I thought that was the craziest story when I read it, a couple of weeks ago, and I'm glad I was able to share with you guys. But again, what a true blue American hero. But anyway, just thinking about the State of the Union speech, again, the analysis, the breathless analysis of the State of the Union speech really doesn't matter. I think the main takeaway for everybody on that speech, the main takeaway is that the entire Democrat caucus did not stand. The Democrat caucus did not stand for the very core principle that they owe allegiance to the U.S. citizen. I thought that was the most embarrassing thing I've ever seen. And quite frankly, when you look at the scope of this, nothing else matters coming out of the State of the Union speech. The visual of the Democrat caucus not standing to support the U.S. citizen, that will be played on a loop forever. That'll be specifically for the midterms. Their core job is to protect and serve the American citizen, and they couldn't do that. That was a shocking, shocking visual to watch. So anyway, that's the main takeaway, is the Democrat caucus not standing for that. Now, a couple other quick takeaways that I had. The SAVE Act. Trump called everybody out to their face. And the excuses were laid bare by Donald Trump. I think that, again, my contention has always been the SAVE Act is going to pass one way or the other, but the inertia, the pressure that's building on this is enormous. It's interesting because CNN talked about it after the fact. So here's CNN talking about the plurality of American citizens that want this. This idea of racism on this, I think, is falling on deaf ears with the U.S. citizen. Here's CNN. 85% of white people want ID. 82% of Latinos want ID. 76% of black people want ID. There are very few things that get a plurality of American citizens to be in agreement, and this is one of them. And I guess my point with this is Donald Trump laid out the excuses. These excuses don't work anymore when there is such inertia for this. So I guess, again, circling back to my initial point, I think the SAVE Act is going to pass. This is reaching a critical mass. I don't know how John Thune can't bring that up for a vote. I really don't understand how people like Lisa Murkowski, Mitch McConnell, how do they stand in the wind? Like, I don't understand how they stand against the Republican electorate. I don't get it. And again, it's bipartisan. It crosses all colors, creeds. I just think the SAVE Act is going to pass, and that's a good thing. So another big takeaway for me, Abigail Spanberger. I talk a lot about Abigail Spanberger on the show. Abigail Spanberger, the newly sworn in governor of Virginia, gave the rebuttal. So she gave the Democrat rebuttal to the State of the Union speech. And I guess looking at this, if you look at her meteoric rise to national prominence, she is the apparent darling of the left here. She is the new shiny object. And I guess if I look at it that way, like, Spanberger then is being positioned for national relevance. I think they've realized, like, the AOCs and the Madamis, these are not popular. Those people have been exposed. But Spanberger is a new shiny object that we don't know a lot about nationally. But the Democrat Party is very obviously positioning her. And I guess the problem with Abigail Spanberger is Abigail Spanberger. She literally looks like the White Witch and the Lion, the Witch in the Wardrobe. She is ice cold, man. Ice cold. She has no personality at all. No warmth. And the visual of her just like this ice queen is not very good. And I guess beyond the visuals of Abigail Spanberger are her policies. Abigail Spanberger's policies have upset almost everyone in Virginia, right and left. The only thing that she's done in Virginia is create a consensus of people that don't like her. And again, I've talked about in the show, but you cannot sit here and preach affordability and then smoke people with brand new taxes. And if you back away from her policies, from her personality, all of it, this whole thing about her being a CIA agent in the past, that is not a good look. There are a lot of questions already that people have about the government and what the CIA does. The fact that she's a former CIA person, that's another huge minus when you look at the profile of a person like Spanberg. But again, I guess the analysis on the Democrats, they don't think about that. And just transparently, as like somebody that fought the school board wars in 21 and 22, to me, as someone that was involved in COVID very heavily, that photo of her with like a scuba helmet on in COVID, that is not a good look. Having somebody that wore a scuba helmet with like a plastic bag around your head in COVID, what message does that send to our enemies? That is a weak look. It's a bad visual. Abigail Spanberger being positioned this way, I think they're not looking at the full scope of what this lady is, what she represents. And I guess just zooming the scope back from the State of the Union speech, I keep thinking that Kamala Harris is going to be the 2028 candidate for the Democrat Party. And offhand, if you're asking me now, I think Spanberger might be on that ticket. So you might have a Kamala Harris Spanberger ticket. I don't think Gavin Newsom's star is fading so fast. His comments earlier this week about the black community, I mean, he's so exposed. And the more people see of Gavin Newsom, the less they like him. Now, if you think that the Foggy Dew is some kind of like pro-Trump, pro-right show, I'm going to go and dispel that notion right now, because I'm now going to be very critical of Donald Trump. I'm almost 50 years old. I've said that before. Now, I have assets. I own a home. I have stocks. I have a 401k. I have all of it. And I guess my problem with this is, specifically with Donald Trump, is that Donald Trump and the Republican Party seem to keep missing an enormous demographic that I care very deeply about, and that would be Gen Z. Gen Z has no assets. Gen Z kids, so that's like what, 15 to 30-year-old kids, these kids don't have homes. They don't have stocks. They don't have 401ks. Gen Z in the entire calculus here, I didn't hear one thing about Gen Z in the State of the Union. Gen Z to me is being ignored. Gen Z is being ignored, and I'm tired of it. It's actually making me very upset. These kids are coming out of college. They've got student debt up the yin yang. They can't get jobs. They can't buy a home. They can't aggregate assets because everything costs so much. What does that do? It delays them creating a family and building lives of their own. We should be worried about our children. We should be worried about younger generation, the next generation, the people behind us. I'm not worried about me. I'm worried about the kids behind us. And I guess my problem with that is that Charlie Kirk knew this. Charlie Kirk knew this very well, that Gen Z was a volcano ready to blow. And I guess if I look at it, like, Gen Z in a lot of ways is totally radicalized. And if you look at the government and the vision that Trump is presenting, the stock's going up, lower interest rate on home, that's great for people that are older, but that doesn't help out a 22-year-old kid with $100,000 in student debt. And I guess my only advice for Donald Trump, you have to talk to these kids. Trump has got to pivot to this generation. The Republican Party, quite frankly, needs to pivot to them too. Reach out your hand to these kids. Record highs in stock markets don't matter to a kid with no assets. And it just, again, Gen Z is so forgotten. And I guess all politicians, right and left, should be ashamed of themselves for forgetting these kids. And I guess I would hope at least this: Donald Trump seems to care about citizens, and citizens means Gen Z. So I guess I can understand that logic. And I suppose the Republican vision, if you look at it more broadly, like, the Republican vision is that a rising tide lifts all boats. And the visual coming out of the State of the Union is apparently the Democrat Party cares about illegals first. Now, if the Democrat Party cares about illegals first, that means Gen Z is about fifth or sixth down the line. They should be number one. Again, criticism of Trump, the Republican Party, Donald Trump in particular, need to be better with Gen Z 1000%. My final takeaway from this State of the Union speech, because it keeps becoming more obvious to me, I'm going to give you a thought experiment. And I actually was texting with friends about this the other day. I'm going to present you a binary option. What would you rather have? A, arrest for 2020, COVID, Russiagate. Or B, American prosperity for 100 years, 200 years. I'd take B. If you're asking me, I would take B. I want and I mentioned it with Gen Z. I want prosperity. I want freedom. I want liberty for future generations. That's all I care about. And I'm going to go ahead and balance this out, okay? I'm probably just like you. I want to see arrests. I'm desperate. I'm desperate for it. I want to see Fauci arrested. I want to see Brennan arrested, Clapper, Holder, Comey, Hillary, all of them, the whole gang. And actually, I would urge you to think about Eric Holder and Fast and Furious, what they did down on the southern border, gun running to the cartels, but that's a story for another day. But I guess if I look at the arrests for these major things that we know about, the 2020 paradox, the COVID paradox, the Russiagate paradox, if I saw arrests for that, yes, that would be justice. I would scratch that emotional itch that I have to see arrests. Now, will we get that? I hope so. But if you ask me, looking at the State of the Union, the way that this is going, I think this is trending to option B. You're going to get the SAVE Act. Blue is losing the culture war. Blue is losing the argument, meaning any political argument, blue cannot stand on its own 2 feet. Have you seen a blue politician seriously face any type of adversarial journalist? I haven't. And if they do, they just lash out with non sequiturs. But you have to look at the electoral map. Blue is losing electoral votes. And quite frankly, if you look at Abigail Spanberger, Kamala Harris, those are your candidates for 28, blue is going to be out of the White House for the next 10 to 20 years. Well, 10 to 20 years with red in the White House is an eternity for the America First movement. Because the thing you got to remember about the next 10 to 20 years, you're going to see the growth of AI. So you will see the growth of AI as a tech sector in the United States under America First. We're already seeing the beginning stages of global peace. You're going to see global peace the next 10, 20 years through the Monroe Doctrine. The seeds are being laid right now. And quite frankly, I think in a lot of ways, we're moving past race. We're moving past race as Americans. There's plenty of Black Republicans, Latino Republicans, women Republicans, this whole canard that we need to be in these separate segments of gender, sex, race, etc. That argument is so old and so tired. No more woke, no more DEI, no more trans, no more childish behavior. And I guess if you look at that and see that whole paradigm shifting to that America First model away from the woke DEI blue, the thing that I would tell you is, yes, I want to rest, but guess what? Obama, Comey, Fauci, etc., all those people will live to see their legacies in ashes. Their movement neutered. And again, Donald Trump is not perfect. He is not perfect at all. I just criticized him. But Donald Trump changed the game. Donald Trump exposed the government right and left for what they are. They don't care about the citizens. And the SAVE Act is Exhibit A of it. So, and I guess moving beyond all of that, like with blue, like in a few years, you're going to have 2028. So you'll have Trump will be out of the picture. He won't be out of the picture, but he'll be out of actual governance. And let's be honest, at that point, you're going to see this old establishment guard turning over. The Mitch McConnells, the Lindsey Grahams, the Chuck Schumers, the Dick Durbins, the Steny Hoyers, all these like old decrepit establishment hacks. All of those old establishment hacks, right and left, that have robbed us blind, all those people are going to phase out. And I hope at that point we get new voices right and left. And I hope a left, quite frankly, with a real American vision, not a vision for illegals. And I guess if you look at it more broadly, my takeaway from that speech, and Donald Trump really nailed on this, globalism lost here. It lost in the United States. Now globalism won in places like the EU, France, England, Canada, and you see the effect of that. Well, again, nationalism is winning. Nationalism won in Poland, Hungary, Argentina with Malay, the United States. And I guess the globalist vision is receding. And let's be honest, if you look at it, this was always my concern. Universal socialism was always the goal of globalism. So again, if I look at a binary choice of like arrests or 200 years of American nationalism, of real colorblind hope, I'm going to take option B. Now I'm going to go ahead and just read this because it blew my mind. This is how Donald Trump closed the State of the Union. And I put this in my phone. Trump, quote, "There is no challenge Americans cannot overcome. No frontier too vast for us to conquer. No dream too bold for us to chase. No horizon too distant for us to claim. For our destiny is written by the hand of Providence, and these first 250 years were just the beginning. From the rugged border towns of Texas to the heartland villages of Michigan, to the sun-kissed shores of Florida, to the endless fields of the Dakotas, from the historic streets of Philadelphia to right here in our nation's capital, Washington, D.C., the golden age of America is upon us. The revolution that began in 1776 has not ended. It still continues because the flame of liberty and independence still burns in the heart of every American patriot. And our future will be bigger, better, brighter, bolder, and more glorious than ever before. Thank you, God bless you, and God bless America." End quote. Thank you, Donald Trump. You are witnessing the second American Revolution led by a modern George Washington in Donald Trump. That's what historians are going to write about this. Whatever evil force was at work with globalism has been receded here. And America is going to thrive, and I'm so excited to be a part of it. But anyway, those are my thoughts on the State of the Union. So another quick hit. I just mentioned trans a minute ago. I want to stay on this trans topic. There's just a lot of moving pieces to it, but I had a quick update for you. And I've talked in the past on the show about the legal issues that the trans movement is running into. And I'm here to report that that's getting a lot worse. So a little bit of background here. The AMA is the American Medical Association. If you remember, the Academy of Plastic Surgeons had come out a few weeks ago proactively, and they said that surgery on minors was wrong. Trans surgery on minors was wrong. Well, I mentioned the AMA. So the AMA, when the Plastic Surgery Board had come out and said, hey, this is wrong, the AMA came out and agreed with the American Society of Plastic Surgeons. So here you have the AMA agreeing with the American Society of Plastic Surgeons that surgery on minors is wrong. Well, here's the problem with that, is that the AMA, in a total break with reality, the AMA is still recommending puberty blockers, meaning medication for transitioning children. So I guess in layman's terms, just to be very clear, here's the AMA. Surgery bad, crazy drugs good. It's totally inconsistent. Well, based on that logical gap, 20 states' attorneys general just sent the AMA a warning shot. The AMA is now being challenged legally. The clinical data, if you look at it for trans surgery on minors, is very, very low, meaning the efficacy is not there. Well, so you have low clinical outcomes for surgery. The problem with it is you also have low clinical data for these crazy drugs that they're pumping into children. So you have low efficacy surgery, low efficacy drugs. And to be totally clear, if you look at this entire thing, hormone therapy, puberty blockers, those crazy drugs can sterilize a child. So I guess zooming the scope back on that, the AMA is in a very tough, they really painted themselves into a corner because the logic here is breaking down for the AMA. What's going to happen here with this situation is that the AMA is going to have to rescind all medication for trans kids, meaning for minors. And if the AMA comes out and rescinds this, which they're going to have to, if they have to rescind this, that will be the final nail in the coffin. Now, you might be curious as to timelines here. The AMA has till March 25th to respond to the 20 states attorney general. And I can promise you, this is 1,000% Foggy Dew promise that the AMA is going to back down. The clinical data is not evident that this helps minors. Now, if you look at this in totality, I just think I said it a minute ago, this is going to end the trans movement. You are not going to have any legal shield to perform surgeries, to provide medications. All of that's going to be stripped away. Now, what it's probably going to do is that's going to end it legally, but what it'll do, it'll create a black market for trans people for these drugs and surgeries. And I guess I look at this whole thing, it makes me mental, and I've talked about this before. My main issue here is the minor part of this. This to me is child abuse. And I think everybody innately knows that this is wrong. Meaning, mutilating a child, pumping a child full of experimental medication, that was always wrong. I think the broader issue here from a political science standpoint is the social contagion of trans. It's a social contagion, and it was used by the left as a fake civil rights issue. But I guess my problem with it is that the genie is out of the bottle on this now. You've had people with 10 years of like trans rights. You've created this social contagion. And I guess if I look at it more broadly, I mentioned that I was in the school board wars of 21 and 22. This is another trust the science failure to me. This is yet another black eye on the expert class, another black eye on the medical establishment. But again, I guess the problem that I have with this is that the damage has been done socially. And it's like COVID. Again, it's like COVID. People believe so completely in the medical establishment. They believe so deeply that what they're being told by doctors, by politicians, like, hey, these are trans rights, this is who they are, all these other things. These people are watching their reality being destroyed in real time. And it's never like, hey, we were hoodwinked, we were fooled. It'll be Trump and the Nazis did this. Trump and the Nazis are stealing my rights. It's another charade, another canard, another just twisting of logic. But I guess just backing away from all of that, where it'll end up is I'm just glad this is going away. And I'm genuinely curious. I always think, like, what are history books going to write about this moment? And I am genuinely curious to see what history books are going to write about this. But trust me, I will be watching the AMA response very, very close. They don't have much time to respond to it. They have less than a month. But I guarantee they're going to back down. I'll be watching. Okay, so kind of to wrap the show up on a fun note for the week, about a month or so ago, I had spoken about a guy named Daniel Daly. And just a quick recap on Daniel Daly. Daniel Daly was a Marine who won 2 Medals of Honor. Now, he was only one of 2 Marines ever to win 2 Medals of Honor. And if you don't remember Daly in the story, he was the guy that yelled, quote, "Come on, you sons of bitches, do you want to live forever?" That quote is on the facade of the Marine Museum here domestically. But again, I said that he was one of 2 Marines ever to win 2 Medals of Honor. And I've been sitting on this story because I actually wrote it when I wrote the thing about Daly. So I've had this just like sitting here, and I wanted to go ahead and wrap it up because you might be curious, well, who was the other Marine who won 2 Medals of Honor? Well, it's kind of interesting because the other Marine actually served with Daniel Daly. The other Marine who won 2 Medals of Honor was a guy named Smedley Butler. Now, you probably never heard of Smedley Butler before, but Smedley Butler is one of the most interesting guys in U.S. history, to me anyway. So here's this very interesting guy named Smedley Butler. Smedley Butler was born in 1881 in Pennsylvania, and he was raised a Quaker. So being raised as a Quaker, Butler was a pacifist. Well, in 1898, Smedley Butler enlisted in the Marines. He actually lied about his age to get a commission. Butler would go on from that point to serve 34 years as a Marine. Smedley Butler eventually rose to the rank of Major General. Well, Smedley Butler won his first Medal of Honor in 1914. So here you have it's 1914, and there was a Marine incursion into Veracruz, Mexico. Well, this incursion by the Marines led to street fighting in Veracruz. So here they are street fighting in Veracruz, and here's Smedley Butler. Smedley Butler very calmly walked down a street through sniper fire. He deliberately exposed himself in the street. What he was doing was coordinating the other Marines, coordinating the attack. So that action of him walking through the street, deliberately exposing himself to fire, earned him his first Medal of Honor. Well, Butler would win his second Medal of Honor a year later in 1915. So here's Smedley Butler, the Marine. He's dispatched to Haiti in 1915 with Daniel Daly. Well, Haitian rebels had assassinated the Haitian president. That's why the Marines were sent in. So here come the Marines. Smedley Butler and his Marines pursued the rebels. The Haitian rebels withdraw to a fort. Well, the Marines are outside of the fort, and they don't have any way to penetrate inside the fort, meaning it's all walled off. The Haitians are shooting at them. So with no direct way to penetrate the fort, Smedley Butler decided to act. What did he do? Well, there was a drain pipe that led into the fort. So here's Smedley Butler. He crawls through a drain pipe into the fort. Butler carries 2 revolvers into the drain pipe. So here he crawls through the drain pipe with 2 revolvers, and when he enters the fort through the drain pipe, he pops out of his drain pipe and he engages the Haitian defenders. Well, he fires his revolvers dry and starts engaging the Haitians in hand-to-hand combat. Well, as he's fighting the Haitians hand-to-hand, he's able to open the fort doors. Well, as soon as Butler opens the fort doors, the other Marines are able to rush in, and they ended up capturing the fort. Well, that action of crawling through the drain pipe with 2 revolvers earns him his second Medal of Honor. So he won 2 Medals of Honor in 2 years. Well, so here you have this true blue American badass, Smedley Butler. He fought in every engagement the Marines were in for the next 34 years. Butler finally left the Marines in 1931. What did he do then? Well, Smedley Butler became very, very involved in U.S. politics. What did he do? He argued constantly in a public setting for veteran pay and care. So here he is, public speaking. I said he was a Quaker. Well, not only was he talking about veteran pay and care, he also became an anti-war pacifist. Smedley Butler became very convinced that the U.S. government was engaged in war profiteering. Butler started to think that the U.S. government was semi-fascist war profiteers. He actually started to change his idea about his own service. He viewed his own service, that he was a participant in the big business of war, and became actually very embarrassed by his service. Now it's interesting. So this guy starts becoming like this anti-war pacifist. He's calling the U.S. government a bunch of semi-fascist war profiteers. Well, Smedley Butler became involved in a very, very big conspiracy in U.S. politics that nobody even remembers. What is the conspiracy that Smedley Butler got involved in? That conspiracy became known as the business plot. So Smedley Butler actually went to Congress. So here you have Smedley Butler, a Marine general who won 2 Medals of Honor, that goes to Congress. Smedley Butler shows up and he started claiming that he had been approached by wealthy U.S. industrialists, businessmen. Smedley Butler claimed that these wealthy U.S. industrialists wanted to hire him. What did they want to hire him for? These businessmen, these wealthy industrialists, allegedly wanted Smedley Butler to orchestrate a coup on the U.S. government. So here you have, a Marine general going to Congress saying, I was approached by U.S. businessmen. They wanted to hire me to orchestrate a coup on the U.S. government. Smedley Butler testified that these businessmen told Butler that they had an army of 500,000 ex-soldiers. So these guys say they have a force of 500,000 ex-soldiers, and they wanted Smedley Butler to lead this insurgency force against the U.S. government. They wanted Smedley Butler and this militia to overthrow President Roosevelt. So again, just to recap, here Smedley Butler claiming he's approached by businessmen, 500,000 soldiers, Butler leads the force, overthrow President Roosevelt. He claimed that these guys wanted to create a new government. So de facto, Smedley Butler was asked to run a coup. Well, you can imagine how this whole thing went down. This entire situation of a major general with 2 Medals of Honor claiming this exploded in the press. This was a massive scandal at the time. So what did they do? This entire issue was very publicly investigated by Congress. The crazy thing about this is that Congress found no credible information to substantiate Butler's claims. So Congress comes out and says, hey, we haven't found anything. This all seems like there's nothing there. Well, what did the media do? So the media starts running with this, saying that Smedley Butler is orchestrating a hoax. The problem? Smedley Butler. This guy's a true blue American hero, a major general, highest decorated Marine ever with 2 Medals of Honor. You're telling me this guy's lying? That guy's lying. So the American people didn't really believe because they all trusted and knew Smedley Butler. But anyway, this was just a massive, massive scandal in U.S. politics that is largely forgotten about today. And the business plot, if you're a air quotes conspiracy theorist, that's a conspiracy theory legend. Now, it's interesting because what else came out of that? That business plot led to another huge political issue in the United States. The investigation that Congress had on this business plot led to a new committee. That committee became known as the House Committee on Un-American Activities. That House Committee on Un-American Activities is better known as HUAC. That may ring a faint bell because HUAC led to who? The rise of Joseph McCarthy. HUAC and Joseph McCarthy investigated communism as Russia rose in the same time period to rival the U.S. McCarthyism through HUAC became a massive flashpoint in U.S. politics. This was the second Red Scare. And it's interesting, if you look at all this stuff, everybody I think knows who Joe McCarthy is. Most people know, peripherally what HUAC was. Does anybody know who Smedley Butler was? No. They don't even, the business plot, nobody knows anything about it because it's totally forgotten about. His heroism, his legacy, everything about Smedley Butler, poof, it's all gone. It faded away. But I guess, thank you, Smedley Butler, for being a true blue American badass who won 2 Medals of Honor. Thank you for your service. Thank you, Daniel Daly, for your service. And quite frankly, thank you for your anti-war stance. He was calling out the government before that was vogue to do so. But Smedley Butler was, an American legend. Thank you for your service, Smedley Butler. But anyway, I just thought it's such an interesting story. So anyway, guys, I'll go ahead and wrap the show up for the week. If you like the show, please go ahead and tell a friend about it. If you would, please follow us on Spotify. You can also follow us on Instagram at Foggy Dew Daily. If you have a question for the show, please go ahead and email us at foggydew95@gmail.com. But in the meantime, I'd ask you to say a prayer, ask questions, and stay vigilant. This is the Foggy Dew signing off.